The history of paleontology is full of all sorts of unfortunate stories. One of the most unfortunate of them all might just be the destruction of German paleontologist Ernst Stromer's life's work during an Allied bombing raid over Munich in 1944. The majority of the museum that contained his specimens from Egypt was destroyed. In the rubble was everyone's favorite Spinosaurus, but also a bunch of other equally fascinating critters now lost to time. However, one of those critters has just been given a new life thanks to the unearthing of old photographs and proactive re-examination by a team of 3 researchers. Hey, while I have your attention, I have 2 other channels you should check out when you get a chance. Edge of Reality is where I talk about cryptids and the paranormal, anything that is creepy, crawly, and outside of the realm of science. Edge's World of Monsters is where I tackle basically anything fictitious, whether that be kaiju or dragons. Aside from the new look and ever-changing traits of the worst famous dinosaur, Spinosaurus, the only other part about it that might be common knowledge is that it was a casualty of World War II. The original fossils of the critter were destroyed in a bombing raid. It was only thanks to discoveries in Morocco that the new understanding of the annoying thing came to be widely known. However, the story, both of Spinosaurus and all of the other critters found in the same rock unit, is far more complex. Ernst Stromer was a German paleontologist who specialized in vertebrate paleontology, eventually becoming well acquainted with the dinosaurs. He first visited Egypt in 1901, looking for mammal bones. However, he found stuff that was way bigger, and would go back several times in the following decade and a half. Stromer and his friend and employed fossil collector, Richard Markgraf, went on an expedition from Cairo to Wadi al-Natron, back to Cairo, and out to south of Luxor in the Nile Valley, and then the Bahariya Oasis, from November of 1910 to February of 1911. This trip resulted in the collection of a vast array of fish, croc, and dinosaur fossils that Stromer took back with him to Germany for preparation and description. In the following years, he would keep in contact with Markgraf, who would continue to collect fossils for him. It was in 1914 when Markgraf collected fossils of a large theropod dinosaur out of layers of marl near the Bahariya Oasis. He tried to send them to Stromer for years, but the political consequences of World War I made the process slow. Stromer wouldn't get these remains until 1922, and then took another 9 years to get enough time to describe them. When he did, he found that he had a totally unique giant meat-eater on his hands. The specimen Markgraf collected was a partial noggin, some neck bones, a single tailbone, 2 parts of the pelvis, a hand claw, both of the femora, and the left fibula. Not a ton, but great for the time, and great for what this type of dinosaur would turn out to be. However, we first must go backwards to go forward. Back in 1925, French scientists Charles Deparey and J. Savornin published a paper of various fossil animals collected from Tinamaun, Algeria. In that collection were a pair of teeth found 5 kilometers apart, eroding from what many scientists would go on to label the continental intercalaire, which is a sort of informal term for a huge stratum of Cretaceous age in northern Africa. There are no images or illustrations of these teeth, and it seems as though they have been lost between 1925 and today, but the authors describe them as wide, flat, and bending slightly in one direction with small serrations, or carinae, on both sides of the blade. Deparey and Savornin would assign these teeth to the genus Megalosaurus as a new species, Megalosaurus saharicus. This was sort of in vogue at the time. The genus Megalosaurus was a wastebasket into which many paleontologists would place new species based on specimens as dubious as teeth. This tradition would even occur as late as the 1950s with the North American Dilophosaurus. In 1927, the pair of Depare and Savonin would publish another paper describing more fossils from the area and reanalyzing older specimens. In this work, they decided that Megalosaurus was not the right genus for their mysterious tooth taxon. Based on the stratigraphic position of the teeth, roughly Albian to possibly Cenomanian ages of the mid-Cretaceous, and not the actual anatomy of said teeth, they decided to apply this species to the North American genus Dryptosaurus. Yeah, back then, Tyrannosauridae wasn't what it is today, and these two researchers weren't even really doing things right even for the time. Once the Egyptian Bahariya theropod material got bumped up to a current work project for Stromer, he looked back into the recent literature, including the teeth that Depare and Savonin had then recently been waffling about. Stromer found that the teeth they described were so similar to those in the jaws of his Egyptian theropod that he thought they were the same animal and that it couldn't possibly be a Megalosaurus or Dryptosaurus. So he published all of it and gave it a new name, Carcharodontosaurus saharicus, the Saharan shark-toothed reptile. The biggest issue with all of this, though, was that the teeth from Algeria were never technically designated as the holotype specimens of a new species of dinosaur. Now, I don't know for sure if this has anything to do with the lack of photos or illustrations of the teeth, because the copies of the original papers I found and read were lacking any of that. They may have been present at some point in time, but are lost just like the teeth are. This makes the teeth syntypes, which are any one of two or more type specimens in a description of a new critter that also has to have never named a holotype for said new critter. This issue is further muddled by Stromer, who did not designate his Egyptian Carcharodontosaurus specimen as a holotype specimen. Though one might interpret his description as using the teeth from Algeria as the holotype, but they were never holotypes in the first place, so the whole thing is a mess. From here, we can go back to World War II. After the Egyptian Carcharodontosaurus material was bombed, it was the only specimen anyone ever meant when they used the name Carcharodontosaurus saharicus. We then skip ahead 50 years to the next time Carcharodontosaurus pops up. Paul Sereno and colleagues found a relatively complete skull of a giant theropod dinosaur from the Cenomanian age of the Kemkem beds of Morocco. This specimen was referred to Carcharodontosaurus saharicus. Finally, a real look at the animal. 2007 saw the official designation of this skull as the neotype of Carcharodontosaurus. A neotype is like a holotype, but it refers to a new holotype used to define a species when the original holotype is lost or destroyed. The Moroccan skull's teeth are pretty much consistent with the tooth shape seen in every other known Carcharodontosaur. They are pointy and curved slightly backwards. However, the teeth of the Egyptian theropod are actually shark-toothed shaped. They are symmetrical and broad. Some bits and pieces referred to Carcharodontosaurus have been coming out of the Kemkem beds for years, but their identity is difficult to qualify, with many experts offering differing perspectives. 2007 also saw the description of more remains of a Carcharodontosaurus from the Albian to Cenomanian aged rocks of the Ikar Formation of Niger. This specimen was just a chunk of the upper jaw, with the rest of the referred material eventually being argued by other researchers to belong to Spinosaurs. This fossil was argued to have enough differences from the Moroccan Carcharodontosaurus material to be its own species, so the authors named it Carcharodontosaurus iguadensis. Its validity remains open to criticism. Now we come to the present day. For the longest time, the only thing that survived of the original Egyptian Carcharodontosaurus remains were Ernst Stromer's illustrations and an endocast that avoided the bombs. Recently, however, a photograph of all of the Egyptian material resurfaced, allowing researchers to get a great idea of what type of traits those bones preserved. Paleontologist Maximilian Kellerman, Elena Cuesta, and Oliver Rauhat finally felt that they had enough evidence of their enigmatic war victim to justify splitting it from the Carcharodontosaurus genus. That's right, according to their January 2025 paper published in PLOS ONE, the Egyptian Carcharodontosaur is too different from Carcharodontosaurus to remain within the genus. So the team decided to name it Tameryraptor marcgraffi, with the genus name meaning thief from the beloved land, and the species name honoring Richard Marcgraf. So, what does this mean for Carcharodontosaurus, you may ask? Not much actually. Since the original teeth used to describe Carcharodontosaurus were not actually made the holotype of the animal, they really don't count. Since the Moroccan skull found in the 90s was made the neotype, what with the loss of both specimens that could have ever been made the holotype, it is now the only thing that can be named Carcharodontosaurus. The Egyptian specimen is too distinct to belong to the same animal as the Moroccan skull and therefore needs its own name. There are rules to naming a new fossil species that you must follow in order for your name and all of the work you did to justify the name to be considered valid by the governing body known as the International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature, or ICZN. This is just so that every scientist in the world knows what every other scientist is talking about when they use a scientific name. They have a whole handbook with all of the rules, and the rules exist to make things as clear and concise as possible. The rules state that you cannot make a destroyed specimen a holotype. Among the many reasons why is that no other scientist can go back to that holotype to validate your work on it or do new work. However, the ICZN has made some exceptions for this rule due to extraordinary circumstances. Kellerman, Cuesta, and Rauhat provide many well-written paragraphs to justify the use of the Egyptian specimen as a holotype. Since scientific names are arbitrary and useless in and of themselves, with their major importance being reference, and so that everyone knows to what specimens you are referring when you use the name in whatever analyses you are doing, the name Carcharodontosaurus can just as easily be applied to any of these specimens. However, there are also rules for how names can be applied. By this, I just mean that whatever name comes first is what takes priority. If, say, you find a specimen of a large theropod dinosaur from Cretaceous California and give it a unique name, but years later, other scientists take another look at your find and justify without a reasonable doubt that your find is actually just a Tyrannosaurus rex, then your name for your specimen is thrown in the garbage, and the older name of Tyrannosaurus rex is applied. The new Tameryraptor shows that extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary actions. Ironically, Tyrannosaurus rex was the subject of just such an extraordinary exemption from the rules. If you'll excuse the digression, a vertebra that belongs to the same animal that is named Tyrannosaurus rex was found and described in the early 1890s by Edward Drinker Cope as Manospondylus gigas. According to the rules, Tyrannosaurus rex should be thrown out and Manospondylus gigas should be the real name. AM&H paleontologist Henry Fairfield Osborn described and named Tyrannosaurus rex in 1905 based on a completely different and far more complete specimen than the vertebra from the 1890s, and even by 1917, Osborn had justified throwing away the Manospondylus gigas label because the vertebra was not diagnostic enough to justify a name, relinquishing it to indeterminate status. AKA, it could be from any giant theropod dinosaur as it doesn't preserve good enough features to lump it into any known dinosaur. So that is basically the reason no one really knew about this for a long time. However, anyone who was in the weeds of literature during the time without internet, the Dark Ages, basically just kept the fact that T-Rex should be M. gigas to themselves. Whatever messy case there could be made for this was effectively quashed in 2000 when the ICZN created a new rule. Any name that had been used and considered valid by all scientists and the public for 50 years becomes the actually valid name, replacing the one everyone thought was invalid, even if it is technically valid. Tyrannosaurus rex is safe, and so is Carcharodontosaurus saharicus, though sort of for different reasons. I think I've sufficiently beat the horse on why Carcharodontosaurus saharicus is still valid, enough for 2 videos. So how's about I get to the meat of the new critter? Tameryraptor is the most complete Carcharodontosaur from Africa, including the nasal bones, the upper jaw bone, a chunk of the back of the skull where the brain was, some neck vertebrae, a backbone, a tailbone, and the two lower parts of the pelvis, both of the femora and a fibula. The most complete of these dinosaurs come from North and South America. So, to fill in the rest of Temeriraptor, one must first know what it was most closely related to. Thanks to the new photographs showing the original bones, the author team were able to compare and contrast the features on the actual fossils to those in the illustrations of said fossils made by Stromer in his original description. The authors could therefore cross-reference for what were the clearest features that could diagnose the Egyptian material as a distinct genus. With all of these features turned into data, and with that data compared with the data of all other known non-superfragmentary Carcharodontosaurs, the team found that Temeriraptor was an early diverging member of the Carcharodontosaur family tree. It specifically places outside of the subfamily Carcharodontosaurinae, which contains most of the giant South American forms. One analysis placed Temeriraptor sort of in between Acrocanthosaurus and the Chinese Datonglong, while another analysis placed it most closely to the Nigerian species of Carcharodontosaurus, and as diverging later than Acrocanthosaurus. Either way, this makes it a non-Carcharodontosaurine Carcharodontosaurid. Confusing, no? With all of the missing pieces filled in with close relatives, here is a slightly speculative Temeriraptor. There's one thing that might immediately stand out to you, and that may have gotten carried away a little on some social media platforms I won't bother mentioning. The thing had a unicorn horn? Well, not so fast. Okay, so a feature that this Carcharodontosaur had that was remarked on and illustrated all the way back in 1931 was a small curved conical bony protrusion from the middle of the nasal bones. According to the description, there is also a depression in front of this knob that makes the knob look bigger than it actually is. As you can see, Stromer even placed a dotted line in front of the knob indicating where he thought the thing may have been bigger and then was eroded away over time. Paleoartist Joschua Knuppe deliberately made this thing appear quite large in the piece he was commissioned to do for the study. This is because these sorts of features were most likely covered in keratin when the animal was alive, and keratin sheaths often obscure the true size and shape of the bony structure underneath them. So, similar to his piece for Alp Karakush, he speculatively exaggerated the feature. This has led many other paleoartists to copy it without reading the paper or differentiating the crest. Here is a diagram from Joschua showing a comparison between the nasal bones of the Moroccan Carcharodontosaurus and our new Temeriraptor friend here. As you can see, the nasal bone of Temeriraptor had a tall midline ridge that would have aided in the small bump structure and could have been the basis for a bigger crest. Carcharodontosaurus, on the other hand, just has a rough, rounded nasal region. To add to this, the nasals of Temeriraptor also feature a lot rougher textures than the nasals of other Carcharodontosaurs, so it's possible the animal had a lot more display features going on with its face. Now that we have that face out of the way, why don't we see how big it was? Let's bring in Mr. Man from
Animal Planet's The Most Extreme
to give you visual aid. The 1931 Stromer paper compared the size of Temeriraptor to what was known of the Tyrannosaur Gorgosaurus at the time. This places Temeriraptor at around 8 to 9 meters, 26 to 30 feet in length. According to a phys.org article, it may have been a bit longer, at 10 meters, 32 feet. This makes it a hefty beast, but not the largest of these types of theropods. Slightly smaller than the largest Acrocanthosaurs. Thanks, Mr. Man. The last piece of this new-old puzzle is what the hell this distinction of Temeriraptor means for the biogeography of mid-Cretaceous Africa. You see, prior to this, the faunas of West and East Africa were considered to be either the same or very nearly the same. Spinosaurus, Baharaiasaurus, Carcharodontosaurus, Abelisaurs, sauropods, and more were found in formations from both regions. The distinction of a West African Carcharodontosaurus and an East African Temeriraptor adds further proof that these two regions were not as closely related as historically thought. Let's not forget that the East African Spinosaurus holotype was destroyed, and then another Spinosaurus specimen was found in Morocco and named as a neotype, just like the Carcharodontosaurus. In fact, there have been many experts adding skepticism to the lumping of the two Spinosaurus specimens into the same species. Further work may find differences here too. As the Temeriraptor authors explain in their paper, the two regions are different in a few other ways. Pyrosaurid, Uruguay-suchid, and Pholidosaurid crocodiliforms were only found in the East African Bahariya Formation, while the Ribachysaurid sauropods are only found in West African Kem sediments. So, as the authors point out, the only thing so far understood to be shared between regions are families of theropod dinosaurs: Carcharodontosaurs, Spinosaurs, and Abelisaurs. Unbeknownst to me, there was a large inland sea that split West and East Africa from the late Cretaceous to the Eocene epoch, which could help to explain a physical barrier to animals in these regions. This is possibly why the faunas were different. If this all turns out to be right on the money, then perhaps the whole Spinosaurus is like a big aquatic marine reptile thing really isn't all that likely. Otherwise, why wouldn't these animals be able to traverse the seaways between continents? Stuff to make you think, for sure. Interestingly, South America was a lot closer to Africa during the Cretaceous, with it being especially close 106 to 73 million years ago. Brazil's Cretaceous formations share a good deal of animal groups with West Africa and not East Africa. Brazil had the giant Spinosaur Oxalaia, a bunch of Ribachysaurids, Noasaurs, Abelisaurs, and other parts of South America had the trifecta of Carcharodontosaurs, Mapusaurus, Meraxes, and Torovenator. The similarities could just be that these groups first evolved when the continents touched and were carried with the separating landmasses as they moved away, or that the closeness of the continents allowed the then newly diverging dinosaur groups to float or swim over. That seems to be the end of the story for Temeriraptor, at least for now. These critters were probably some of the top predators of their time and place, but they will remain a mystery until more specimens are revealed from the Bahariya Formation of Egypt. Unless, of course, something very similar to it is found in some other fossil-bearing localities. Imagine that one is found in Morocco and throws a big wrench into any hypotheses about biography I've presented here. Until then, I cannot wait for more reevaluating of Stromer's work. For more interesting stories about nature, the history of life, or what goes bump in the night, subscribe, like this video, drop a comment in the comment section below, and hit the bell icon to stay in the know with everything Edge. Thanks for watching.